do have one more announcement. Please, take a look.
We are Venom.
Wow, I can't believe that Spider-Man is in the new Smash Bros. Please, Nintendo, add Thanos. It'll be such a missed opportunity if you don't include Thanos. But in all seriousness, I know that Cooper is making reviews again. He just did a Sonic 4 review, which was a pretty good review, but not as good as most of his Cooper's Perspective reviews, which is why I'm doing this series. He's never bringing Cooper's Perspective back, and even if he does return to Spider-Man one day, it still probably won't be part of Cooper's Perspective. And also, if he does return to Spider-Man reviews, I am not deleting these videos, because I put a lot of time and effort into them. I was just telling anyone who was wondering, but let's finally get into the review. Oh, sorry, wrong game. After Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, a few more Spider-Man games were made, such as Web of Shadows, which spawned one of IGN's worst reviews of all time. I mean, seriously, look at this guy. He can't even do a proper web strike. There was also Shattered Dimensions, the first Spider-Man game developed by Beenox, who made a few movie tie-in games, a few Skylanders games, and a few Call of Duty games. Beenox also developed Edge of Time, which was the only Spider-Man game that I haven't played because it just never interested me. It just looks like an inferior Shattered Dimensions with 2 playable characters instead of 4. Don't you love it when developers cut down on content? So Beenox returned to develop the Amazing Spider-Man games. So that brings up the question, did the new team succeed on making the Amazing Spider-Man into an enjoyable experience, or did they mess it up? Well, as always, I'll start off with the story. The previous Spider-Man movie games were based off the movie, but had their own subplots added in, but this game completely ditches that, and instead has the story take place a few months after the movie. But there's only one problem with that. Just like with The Incredibles Rise of the Underminer, the actual sequel to the movie ends up deleting the events of the game, which were supposed to be canon. I was okay with it in The Incredibles 2, but with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I really disliked how it erased the story of the game. In this game, the Rhino was a cross-species, but in the second movie, he was some guy in a mech like in the Ultimate Comics. Alistair Smythe was in this game as a main villain, and he dies in the end credit scene, but he's in the movie sequel. This makes no sense, you're supposed to be dead! Perhaps the Amazing Spider-Man games are alternate universes. So there's one canon, where the timeline follows both of the movies and nothing else, or there's a second timeline where the movie happens, then the game, and then the second game. Enough about that, let's actually talk about the plot itself. We start off with Peter and Gwen sneaking around Oscorp. They meet Alistair Smythe, who will be important later on. All of the cross species in the building break loose. Gwen ends up getting bitten by one of them, making her the first to suffer from the cross species virus, and she gets left at Oscorp in quarantine. One killer robot later. Peter gets Dr. Connors out of a mental facility because he's the only person who could create a cure for the disease. In the process of all this, though, all the other inmates end up being freed. Yeah, I know, this is an Arkham ripoff, but still handled well regardless. He takes Connors to the apartment that he's house sitting for during the summer, which just so happens to be Stan Lee's.
That's the last time I ever take a discount vacation.
My days of breaking into places and stealing are done. What do you want me to do?
I want you to break into a place and steal some shit.
While he's at Oscorp Archives, we are introduced to Whitney Chang, who is not only a reporter, but also a character made specifically for this game. You end up taking her camera, so if you'd like, you could take pictures of certain objects or enemies and levels, which I find pretty cool. Once the research is returned to Connors, you need a sample of a cross-species DNA so the antidote can be completed. Once the DNA is collected, a few robots want a piece of the action. Another robot fight later. Connors finishes his serum, in which he states that there's no time to test it. That's kind of stupid due to how dire the situation is, but I also understand since we're in a rush, and the antidote had a good chance of working. Yeah, I said had a good chance of working. The cure doesn't work, and it ends up taking Smythe's legs, which fuels him with anger and hatred against Connors, so he becomes the villain of this game. That moment when the video game does a better job of giving the villains reasons to be villains than the actual movies. Yet another robot fight later. Spider-Man returns to the apartment injured and weak, which I really don't think that Scorpion and the SO2 put that much of a hurt on him, but I'll go with it. He gets some rest, and while doing so, Connors realizes that Peter's blood is what should be used for the antidote because he's always remained human and has never mutated into a...
Oh my goodness! Squidward!
It's off to Oscorp again, where the antidote actually works this time, curing the scientists and Gwen. After another fight with Scorpion, we return to the apartment where Connors tells you about a bank robbery. Who's behind this, you may ask? Felicia Hardy. In this game, she doesn't take on the Black Cat persona, but she does in the second game, which I think is good development for the character. Also, earlier in the game, there's a cutscene that shows her escaping the mental facility, so I'm glad that this gets resolved rather than the writers just forgetting about it. Now that she has been taken care of, Smythe kidnapped Connors, and here we go again. One final robot fight later. Here we are in Oscorp. Hey Kurt, let's get out of here. They always say that the dark side will give you cookies, but I don't see any here. Smythe uses his nanobot cocktail to drain Spider-Man's powers, which is also slowly killing him. Which I do really like this part of the game, because it creates tension and conflict within the main character. Yes, I know that may sound hypocritical of me because I said that in the Spider-Man 2 game, they don't ever go over that plot point. And I'm glad that they didn't because that would have been boring to play through. But the reason why I say so is because what really could you do with that? Turn the raindrops keep falling on my head seat into a quick time event? Since Smythe discovered the apartment, everyone goes to the lizard's old lair in the sewers from the movie, where he explains that there is a small time window before the lizard brain takes over, which he can use to stop Smythe with his surplus of lizard DNA. When Spidey passes out, Gwen brings him back to consciousness, which later on brings her to realize that if he lets the robots hit him, it will destroy the nanobots in his blood and he'll get his powers back, which he does exactly that. They defeat Smythe in what is quite possibly the easiest boss fight since Chaos Zero from Sonic Adventure. Unfortunately, the lizard's brain takes over, so it's time for one final trip to the sewers. After getting injected with the serum, he turns back to normal again and returns to the asylum as promised. As previously mentioned, there's also an end credit scene where Smythe dies from the hands of his own robot. Or should I say, claws, legs. I thought that this game's story was very well done. I'd actually say that this game's story is better than both of the Amazing Spider-Man movies. That's ironic, but still how I feel. I still think that Ultimate Spider-Man has the best story in any Spider-Man game, mostly because it picks up right where the comics left off, and the writing was so good, but this game comes a close second. Although I definitely feel like this game's story wouldn't have worked as well if it was a movie, for quite a few reasons, so now that I think about it, saying that this game's story is better than the movies isn't really that fair of a comparison, but I'm not going to talk about that because this video has been going on long enough. So while I really like the story, that's kind of where my extreme positives end, because how I feel about the gameplay of this game is actually quite funny. For every positive that I have, there's also a negative that said positive carries, whether it be minor or major. Before I say anything about the gameplay, I just like to say that a lot of people say that this game is an Arkham ripoff, but I think that these people forget that Arkham's combat took a lot of inspiration from Spider-Man 2. Also, I have no idea how, but as a kid, I loved the Lego Batman games and Injustice, but I've never heard of the Arkham series as a child, and I didn't know that those games existed until about 2015, when Arkham Knight had already came out, and I don't think that I even knew that the Arkham games were as well received as they were until Godzilla Mendoza started his Spider-Man retrospective. And I never really tried getting into the series, probably because it wasn't Spider-Man. Because Spider-Man is really the only superhero that I closely follow. Like, I'll still watch a superhero movie or cartoon whenever they come out, but in terms of video games and comic books, Spider-Man is the only character where I care about any of that anymore. So, like, that new Spider-Man game that's coming out in September, which is my birth month, by the way, if that game were an Iron Man game or a Hulk game, I probably wouldn't know about it unless I was watching an E3 live stream, which I was when they showed Spider-Man, if YouTube recommended the trailer to me, or if somebody that I'm subscribed to made a video about it. But in a way, I am kind of glad that I haven't played the Arkham games, so that not only could I get as much enjoyment as I can out of this game, but I can also enjoy the Arkham series just as much as everyone else. I plan on playing the Arkham series once I have time to let the new Spider-Man game sink in, so maybe once the new year begins, I'll start playing them. And I'm actually going to start with Arkham Origins, because that was the first game in the continuity. So if I start off with that, it won't feel as weird to go backwards in time in a game series that you're playing for the first time all at once. That was pretty good for an unscripted part, but anyway, let's get back to The Amazing Spider-Man. Regarding the gameplay, first of all, the camera is really close to Spider-Man. While I don't mind this, I would have liked it if they had kept the camera the way it was in Shattered Dimensions. But the camera being really close to Spidey makes it very cinematic when swinging around the city, which I really like. And speaking of cinematic, one thing that I like about this game is that the only kind of HUD that you have is the phone. And you can disable that at will, so the game will look even more cinematic with no HUD. And since there is no HUD, that means that there is no health meter. Instead, when you take damage, the screen turns red, just like in games such as Uncharted and Tomb Raider. And speaking of damage, let's talk about the combat. Wow, I am really good at sentence transitions, aren't I? The combat in this game, I actually think is pretty good. Sure, it is mostly button mashing, but all of the moves that Spider-Man does look very cool, and enemies can be defeated real quickly, which prevents the combat from getting stale. But unfortunately, the sequel to this game decided to throw that out the window, but hey, that wasn't my decision. Another reason why I like the combat in this game is all the upgrades you can get. It's very fun to stick people on walls with web shots, and to do what is one of my favorite things to do in Spider-Man games, which is to grab an enemy, spin them around, and throw them at one of their friends. There are also objects that you can use to drop on the enemies, which will leave them stunned so that you can web them all up, which reminds me of Ultimate Bomb Squad, where you had to web up the enemies after defeating them. Also, dodging has once again been changed. In fact, it's not even a dodge anymore. It's a counterattack. When your spider sense is white, you have to press the X button to avoid their attack, where in the process, Spider-Man will also attack the enemy, which if you're going to have counterattacks, then do what Spider-Man 3 did, where you had to press the attack button after dodging. By Spider-Man doing that automatically, it makes the combat feel like it's on autopilot. Also, when your spider sense turns red, you have to use the Weber tree, which I do kind of like that, because it adds a little bit of strategy to the combat, rather than in the second game where all you had to do was dodge roll. Also, yes, I said press the X button earlier. I played the Wii U version because I saw the trailer for the Amazing Spider-Man 2 game, and being really excited for it, I then thought to myself, wait a second, was there a game for the first movie? Because I swear I remember seeing the trailer for it in the movie theater. They had some TV screens out in the concession stand. They play food commercials or movie previews, and that's where I saw the trailer. So after doing some research, I found out that the Wii U version of the game was called the Deluxe Edition, and that you get the DLC for free, so sign me up. I guess the next thing I'll talk about is the traversal in the game, which, let me start off with that by saying Spider-Man's running speed is painfully slow. There's no sprint button like in Spider-Man 2 and 3, which was one of the reasons why I'm quite fond of those games. Adding in a sprint button allows much more freedom in terms of control, so getting rid of it feels like a slap in the face. This game also has wall running, which is no longer momentum based. Not only does that not make any sense, but that kind of takes away the fun from it. I always loved running off the side of a huge building in about 3 seconds in Spider-Man 2, but in this game, it feels like you're being restricted. Of course, there's also the web swinging, Earlier I said that the web swinging does look very cinematic because of the game's camera angle, but the actual swinging itself leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. First of all, physics and momentum are non-existent, and the webs don't attach to anything. I shouldn't even have to explain how much of a sin that is. There's also a brand new way of traversal in this game called the Web Rush. In this mode, you could press the right trigger to automatically go somewhere, or you could hold it to enter a first-person mode, where you can choose multiple perch points. I like the Web Rush because it adds an extra option of traversal, the animations look cool, and it adds to the cinematic nature of the game. Also...
Yee! See, this is how you Web Rush, guys. Now, I hate it when people do this, where they always go in the first-person mode, and then Web Rush, and then do it again, and then do it again, and do it again. That's what I hate. You have to do it automatically, and you have to be skillful when doing it. That's why this game got some bad reviews, and that's why not a lot of people like Web Rush, because they don't know how to use it properly. And it looks cool in a cinematic way. While it may not be fun gameplay-wise, it looks really cool.
Something that I'd like to add is the stealth. While it's cool to take down enemies while they're unaware of your presence, the enemies in this game must be blind, because you could take out someone who is literally standing right next to somebody else and they won't notice. Well, that was quick. The very last thing to talk about in terms of gameplay is the boss battles, which the bosses in this game have to be one of, if not, the worst part of this game. While they look pretty cool, they are way too easy and quite boring. Pretty much every boss fight is the same. Dodge attacks, find an opening, give them a knuckle sandwich. I mentioned this earlier in the review, but the boss fight against Smythe has to be one of the easiest boss fights in video game history. Take a look for yourself.
Also, why'd you just go over there? You should have at least tried and hit us with your laser turrets that you have. Uh-oh. I know that's what you want us to do, Alistair, but come on, try and be a bit more supportive, okay? No, wait, aw, dang. Of course we have to zoom out a little bit more. Oh, come, nothing's in the way, Spider-Man. That's the perfect shot? Sure, why not? Great. Good to know that the best composition is to zoom out even further from the main object. Photography tips 101 from Peter Parker himself. That's right, we gotta go behind him. Of course. Yeah, take that. Woo! This is actually really cool, teaming up with the lizard right here. This is actually awesome. Oh no, one turret got off of him. We're screwed! What can we do? Oh wait, that's right. Beat him up even more. Yeah! Alistair, shouldn't you have like rockets in that thing, or at least try and shoot me better? The way that you're trying to kill me right now is not working at all. Woo! Come on, Kurt, hang in there. We can do this. Also, I'm confused. Once again, I brought this up in another episode, but why is it that Spider-Man and his suit damage is mainly on his back when he's fighting enemies from the front? How to get on his back? I don't know how that works. Look at how damaged his back is compared to his front of his suit. It's just strange to me. Ooh! Yeah, get him, Kurt. Go for it. Whoa! That didn't seem that kind of you, Alistair. Come on. That's just harsh. Also, comparing how the game was from the beginning of the game to now, like, we were just walking a nice Oscorp facility, taking a good old tour, having Alistair help us on that tour, and now we're fighting him in a giant exoskeleton suit while the entire New York City is about to be crushed by his giant scorpion robot that apparently he made with no government attention whatsoever from Oscorp itself. Sure. All in all, this game is pretty darn cool. Especially this final fight is awesome. Ha-ha! Third time's a charm, right, buddy? Easiest boss fight ever. Didn't even get hit once, but sure. Go for him, Peter. Yeah! Take that. Now you have no arms. Even though you're handicapped. Whoa, what the heck, Kurt?
Since the gameplay is out of the way, I'll talk about the graphics and the soundtrack. So, first of all, the graphics of this game do look good, but I think it's just that the color palette doesn't benefit the overall look of the game, just like Spider-Man 3. People always say that this game has better graphics than the second game, but I'm not sure if I agree or not, because the first game tried to look more realistic, while the second game tried to look more like a modern comic book. And I'm not a huge fan of realistic graphics in video games, because I play video games to escape reality, so by giving a game realistic graphics, you're taking away part of what makes the experience special. I do sometimes like realistic graphics in video games, in some games like Grand Theft Auto 5, where the graphics do look realistic, some sort of video game shine to them, but I'm still not a big fan of realistic graphics. As for the soundtrack, overall, I'd say that it's enjoyable. The previous Movie Time games had a lot of variety in their music, especially the third one, but in this game, every song uses an orchestral score, which as a result, some songs are a bit forgettable, but some songs can be quite good. So that's about everything that I have to say about this game. So now it's time to answer the question provided in the beginning of the video, which was if BNauts managed to make an enjoyable movie tie-in game. Ordinarily, this is the part where I would say, may I get a meme, but Alpaca Hawk hasn't made any YouTube poops for the Amazing Spider-Man movies yet, so I'll just go straight to the point. I found this game good enough, but it's a step down from its predecessors. But when I say that, I'm only talking about the movie games. I basically consider this game a half-baked cookie. It's not a bad game by any means, and it had some good ideas, but it didn't use them to their full potential. So with that said, I'll give this game a B-. Wow, this review was a lot longer than I expected it to be. Hopefully my Amazing Spider-Man 2 review won't be... Huh?
What the fuck?
It's fine if you're disappointed, but I'm not reviewing the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Because the new Spider-Man game is coming out very soon, and at this point there is no way that I'll be able to finish the review before that game comes out. Like, it'll take a miracle if I can. So, why would I waste my time? Do you guys really want me to go through that? Also, because I really don't have that much to say about the game that hasn't been said a million times already. The task force sucks. The swinging improved from the first game. Everything else is pretty much a downgraded version of the first game. And I'm not a negative person, so as a result of that, I really don't like making reviews that are kind of negative. So why would I make one? That's the end of this review. That's the end of this series. I'm done. Let me have some time alone. Give me like 2 weeks. And then I'll start working on my next video. They had some TV screens out in the cassette.
Electro must be working for someone.
This is too good to be true. I'm already at full health.
There are also objects that you can use to drop on the enemies, which will leave you... No, I can't speak.
Ah, Rhino! I knew no prison was wide enough to hold you.
Wide enough. Yeah, funny.
But they still have some sort... I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say some sort of, not some short of.
What are you? Go!
Running out of time here, Tails!
Your worst nightmare has arrived.
Pack up your stuff! I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.